and Fed Government Agency. Good morning and welcome to Akahi News. Today is the 26th of August 2026, and Nigeria is waking up to a combination of developments that go far beyond ordinary political headlines. From a reported mass abduction in Niger State, to a fresh political battle over petrol subsidy involving Obi, Omoyele Sowore and other presidentials, to the political shockwaves from the Osun governorship election, of what these developments mean for President Bola Ahmed Tinubu and the 2027 election is becoming increasingly important. And then there is another disturbing story, the discovery of an alleged Fed government agency that reportedly managed to build a nationwide network and seek government support. So, in today's Akahi News Analysis, we are asking 5 major questions. What is happening to Nigeria's security? Was removing the petrol subsidy a mistake, or is bringing it back the bigger mistake? What exactly did the Osun election tell us about Nigerian politics? Should President Tinubu be worried about 2027? And finally, how can an alleged Fed government agency operate around government institutions without being detected earlier? Let's take them one after another. Section 1. Revolving light mass abduction. About 600 people reportedly taken. What does it say about Nigeria's security? Let us begin with the most disturbing story. President Bola Tinubu has ordered an immediate rescue operation following a mass abduction in Niger State. Reuters reports that armed gunmen attacked a mosque in Niger State and abducted an estimated 600 people, while about 30 people were reported killed. However, and this is extremely important, Reuters said it could not independently verify the exact number of people abducted. That qualification matters. In today's social media environment, numbers can travel faster than facts. So, while the figure of approximately 600 abducted people is being widely reported, responsible journalism requires us to distinguish between what has been reported and what has been independently verified. But whether the final number is 600, 500, 400 or significantly lower, the fundamental issue remains extremely serious. How can armed criminals gather enough strength to abduct such a large number of people? That is the question Nigerians should be asking. According to reports, the attack happened in the Bogu area of Niger State, and the violence has reportedly forced people to flee towards neighboring Benin Republic. And this is where the story becomes bigger than one kidnapping incident. Nigeria has battled insecurity for years. Kidnapping has evolved from isolated attacks on individuals into a major criminal industry. Bandits have demonstrated their ability to operate in remote communities, attack vulnerable populations, demand ransom and, in some cases, move across difficult terrain and borders. Reuters quoted analysts who said the incident highlights the growing mobility and power of armed criminal and militant groups operating across borders and in remote areas. But what should we learn from this? The first lesson is that security is not simply about having soldiers and police officers. It is also about intelligence. It is about early warning. It is about community networks. It is about communication between security agencies. It is about controlling criminal movements before they become large-scale attacks. And it is about preventing criminals from establishing permanent bases. President Tinubu has now ordered the military and other security agencies to launch a coordinated rescue operation. Xinhua also reports that the president directed security and intelligence agencies to immediately begin the rescue effort. But here is the difficult question. Should Nigerians judge the government only by its ability to rescue people after an attack? Or should government also be judged by its ability to prevent such attacks from happening in the first place? That is where the debate becomes uncomfortable. Rescuing kidnapped Nigerians is obviously important, but prevention is even better. If criminals can successfully attack a large gathering and abduct hundreds of people, then the government has to examine what happened before, during and after the attack. Were there intelligence warnings? Were local security structures overwhelmed? Were communities sufficiently protected? Did the attackers cross from another area? How long had they been planning the operation? And perhaps most importantly, where are the abducted Nigerians now? Those are the questions that deserve answers. And there is another dimension. This is not the first time Nigeria has dealt with mass abductions. On August 5th, the State House announced the rescue of 308 abducted citizens from Niger and Kwara states, including 163 people from Waro in Kwara and 145 from Niger State. That means the latest incident should not be viewed in isolation. Nigeria needs a long-term security architecture capable of stopping criminals from repeatedly returning to the same communities. Akahi News Analysis. The government has a responsibility to act decisively. But the opposition also has a responsibility to avoid exploiting tragedy merely for political advantage. And Nigerians have a responsibility to demand evidence, accountability and results rather than simply exchanging political accusations. The central question is not, who can shout the loudest about insecurity? The central question is, who can actually make Nigerians safer? Section 2. Fuel pump Atiku, Obi, Sowore and the fuel subsidy war. Now let's move from insecurity to the economy. Because even when Nigerians are not worried about being kidnapped, millions are worried about something else. How do I survive? The petrol subsidy debate has returned with enormous political force. At the Nigerian Bar Association conference in Port Harcourt, presidential contenders and political figures including Peter Obi, Omoyele Sowore and Rotimi Amechi clashed over fuel subsidy and insecurity. The argument is not simply about petrol. It is about the cost of living. It is about government policy. It is about who should bear the economic burden. And increasingly, it is about 2027. Former Vice President Atiku Abubakar has proposed restoring petrol subsidy if elected president in 2027. This is particularly controversial because Atiku campaigned in 2023 for the removal of subsidy. Peter Obi has disagreed with Atiku's position, while the broader debate has exposed fundamentally different approaches to economic management. Now, let us be fair. The argument for subsidy removal is straightforward. Governments can no longer afford to spend enormous amounts subsidizing petrol. Subsidy can encourage corruption. It can create opportunities for arbitrage and smuggling. And money spent subsidizing fuel could theoretically be redirected into infrastructure, education, healthcare, transportation and other productive areas. But there is another side. When subsidy is removed in an economy where wages do not immediately rise, transportation costs increase. Food distribution becomes more expensive. Businesses pay more for logistics. Workers spend more money going to work. And ordinary families feel the pressure almost immediately. That is why the subsidy debate is so emotionally powerful. So who is right? This is where Nigerians need to be careful. It is easy for politicians to say, I will bring back subsidy. It is also easy for another politician to say, subsidy was corruption. But Nigerians should ask a deeper question. What is the alternative? If subsidy is restored, how will the government pay for it? If subsidy remains removed, how will government protect the poorest Nigerians from the consequences? If the government saves money from subsidy removal, where is that money going? And can Nigerians actually see the benefits? The presidency has strongly rejected Atiku's claims about subsidy savings. In a recent statement, the State House argued that Atiku's assertion about a 30 trillion naira subsidy windfall was false. That means we are not dealing with a simple economic disagreement. We are dealing with competing narratives. One side says subsidy removal has harmed Nigerians. Another says subsidy removal was necessary but that implementation and management are the real problems. Another side wants a different economic model entirely. And that is precisely why this debate will become more important as 2027 approaches. Akahi News Analysis. The real test should not be who promised cheaper petrol. The real test should be who has a credible plan for making Nigerians' lives cheaper and more productive. If a politician promises subsidy, Nigerians should ask, how much will it cost? If another politician defends subsidy removal, Nigerians should ask. That is how citizens should judge economics, not by slogans, not by political loyalty, but by numbers, evidence and results. Section 3. Ballot box with ballot Osun election shock. Why APC must pay attention. Now let's come home to Osun. The Osun governorship election has already produced one of the most important political stories of the month. INEC declared Ademola Adeleke the winner of the August 15th governorship election. Premium Times reports that Adeleke defeated APC candidate Bola Ahmed Tinubu by 66,252 votes, after polling 511,067 votes across the state. But the significance of Osun goes beyond Osun. Why? Because Nigeria's 2027 political calculations have already started. The campaign season for the 2027 general elections officially began on August 19th, according to reports. So the Osun election arrived almost like an early political examination. And the result has generated arguments within the APC. Some APC stakeholders have blamed internal divisions and the alleged exclusion of party members for the defeat. Former governor and current minister of Marine and Blue Economy, Boyega Oyetola, has also become part of the post-election conversation. But this is where we must be careful. It would be simplistic to say, one person caused APC's defeat. Elections are rarely that simple. Political parties win and lose elections because of a combination of factors. Candidate popularity, party structure, local organization, voter turnout, economic conditions, internal party unity, opposition coordination, campaign messaging, and the ability to convince voters that your party deserves another opportunity. The Osun result therefore deserves serious analysis. What did voters actually say? One interpretation is that the electorate was not persuaded by the APC's campaign. Another is that Adeleke and his political structure were simply stronger. Another interpretation is that internal opposition within APC weakened its performance. And some analysts have described the result as a warning signal to President Tinubu and the APC ahead of 2027. But here is where I disagree with anyone who says Osun has already predicted the result of the 2027 presidential election. No. One state election cannot determine a national election. Nigeria is too diverse. The political calculations in Lagos are not necessarily the same in Kano. What happens in Rivers is not necessarily what happens in Borno. What voters prioritize in Osun may differ from what voters prioritize in the north. So Osun should be treated as a signal, not a prophecy. Section 4. Fire is Osun a warning to Tinubu ahead of 2027? Now we reach the biggest political question. Does Osun represent a warning to President Tinubu? My answer is, it should. But not necessarily because Osun proves Tinubu will lose. Rather, because it demonstrates that political assumptions can be dangerous. The APC may have enormous national resources. The president has incumbency. The ruling party controls the federal government. But none of those things automatically guarantee victory. The Osun result shows that voters can make choices that surprise political establishments. And the opposition parties are already beginning to frame the election as evidence that the APC can be defeated. That narrative could become politically powerful. But there is another side. The opposition remains fragmented. Nigeria's opposition has not yet demonstrated a universally accepted national political structure capable of defeating the APC. That is one of the biggest advantages the ruling party still has. And this is why the next several months will be fascinating. Will opposition politicians unite? Will Atiku, Peter Obi, Sowore and other political actors remain separate? Will new alliances emerge? Will regional interests determine the shape of the opposition? Will the APC resolve its internal problems? And perhaps the biggest question, will Nigerians vote based primarily on economic performance, insecurity, identity, party loyalty or the personality of the candidates? The answer to that question could determine 2027. The Tinubu factor. President Tinubu's biggest political challenge is not simply opposition parties. It is performance. If Nigerians believe the economic circumstances are improving, the administration can argue that its difficult reforms are beginning to produce results. But if insecurity remains severe and ordinary Nigerians continue to struggle with food, transport, electricity and other basic costs, opposition politicians will have a powerful message. That is why stories such as the Niger State mass kidnapping and the petrol subsidy debate are not separate from 2027. They are becoming part of the political conversation. Security affects elections. Food prices affect elections. Fuel prices affect elections. Jobs affect elections. Trust affects elections. And the perception of government competence affects elections. Akahi Master Analysis. So, is Tinubu doomed because APC lost Osun? No. Is the Osun result irrelevant to Tinubu? Absolutely not. It is a warning that political power must continually be renewed through public confidence. The 2027 election will not be won in August 2026. But the battle for public opinion is already underway. Section 5. Revolving like the fake government agency scandal. How did this happen? Now we come to perhaps the most curious story of the 5. Nigeria is investigating another alleged fake government agency. President Tinubu has ordered an investigation into a man accused of creating a fake government agency. The development comes after an earlier investigation into another alleged fraudulent institution. According to reports, the alleged fake agency was able to establish a nationwide network and even approach state governments for support. Premium Times reported that between January and February, the organization wrote to governors in Lagos, Imo, Ondo, Sokoto, Edo, and Nasarawa, seeking government support. Think about that. If an organization can present itself as a government-linked institution and operate across several states, no longer simply who created it? The bigger question is, who allowed it to operate? How were its documents verified? Did officials check whether it had legal authority? Did government agencies receive correspondence from it? Did anybody ask for evidence of its establishment? Did people inside government knowingly cooperate with it? Or was it simply a case of bureaucratic negligence? Reports say the alleged agency even claimed some form of Federal Executive Council approval, while investigators have questioned its legitimacy. That is extremely serious, because government institutions operate on trust. If a person can create a fake agency, obtain recognition, approach government officials and seek access to public resources, then the problem is not merely the individual. It is also a system problem. The cable reported that Tinubu ordered the arrest of George Uwabweze over the alleged operation of a fake government agency and that 3 permanent secretaries were suspended amid the investigation. Now, suspension or arrest does not mean guilt. The allegations still have to be properly investigated and established. That is an important principle. But the investigation itself raises serious questions. What if this happened elsewhere? Imagine a private group creating a fake government agency. Then imagine the group approaching governors. Then imagine officials taking the organization seriously. Then imagine the group seeking land, funding or other government support. That is exactly why institutional verification matters. Every government agency should have a clear legal foundation. There should be public records. There should be identifiable officials. There should be an accountable ministry, department or agency. There should be a chain of responsibility. And there should be systems capable of quickly exposing fraudulent claims. Akahi Master Analysis. The government deserves credit if it is genuinely investigating and exposing these cases. But the ultimate success will not be measured by how many people are arrested. It will be measured by whether government systems are strengthened so that the same thing cannot happen again. Nigeria does not merely need punishment after fraud. Nigeria needs prevention before fraud. Let's cycle the bigger picture. 5 stories, 1 Nigeria. Now let's bring everything together. At first glance, these 5 stories have nothing in common. A mass kidnapping, a fuel subsidy argument, an Osun election, the 2027 presidential race, and a fake government agency. But underneath them is one common issue. Trust. Can Nigerians trust the government to protect them? Can Nigerians trust economic policies to improve their lives? Can Nigerians trust political parties to listen to voters? Can Nigerians trust elections to reflect their choices? And can Nigerians trust government institutions to know who is legitimate and who is not? That is the bigger story. 1. Security. The Niger State abduction reminds us that government cannot afford complacency. The reported scale of the incident makes it particularly disturbing, even as the exact number of abductees remains subject to verification. The government must rescue the victims. But beyond rescue, Nigerians need prevention. 2. Economy. The subsidy debate shows that Nigeria has not finished answering one of its biggest economic questions. How do you reform an economy without crushing the people you are trying to help? That is the challenge facing whoever governs Nigeria. 3. Democracy. Osun demonstrates that Nigerian voters cannot simply be taken for granted. Political parties must organize. Candidates must connect with voters. And internal party divisions can have consequences. 4. 2027. The presidential election is now moving from distant political speculation to an increasingly active contest. The campaign season has officially begun, and every major election and policy controversy will increasingly be interpreted through the 2027 lens. But Nigerians should resist premature conclusions. Osun is a warning signal, not a presidential result. 5. Institutions. Finally, the alleged fake government agency scandal raises a fundamental question about Nigeria's bureaucracy. Can a fake institution really get close enough to government to seek official recognition and public resources? If investigators prove that happened, the country needs to examine not only the alleged perpetrators but also the weaknesses that allowed the operation to develop. Akahi News Analysis. Ladies and gentlemen, Nigeria is entering a very interesting political period. The 2027 election may still be months away, but the forces that will determine it are already taking shape. Security, economy, political alliances, public trust, institutional credibility. These are the real battlegrounds. President Tinubu and the APC will have to demonstrate that their policies are producing tangible results. The opposition will have to demonstrate that it can offer more than criticism. And Nigerians themselves will have to make perhaps the most important decision. Not merely, who do I like, but, who can govern this country effectively? Because Nigeria's problems are now too serious for politics based only on personality. When hundreds of people are reportedly abducted, Nigerians need security. When petrol prices and living costs become political weapons, Nigerians need economic competence. When an election produces an unexpected result, politicians need to listen. When 2027 approaches, Nigerians need credible choices. And when alleged fake institutions can penetrate government structures, Nigerians need stronger institutions. So, the big question this morning is not simply, who will win in 2027? The bigger question is, what kind of Nigeria will Nigerians be voting for in 2027? A Nigeria that is safer. A Nigeria where economic reforms actually improve living standards. A Nigeria where elections genuinely reflect voters' choices. A Nigeria where government institutions are difficult to manipulate. That is the Nigeria Nigerians should demand. And that is why these stories matter. This is Akahi News Analysis. I am Joseph Iyaji for Akahi News. Stay informed, stay critical, and most importantly, do not allow politicians to do your thinking for you. Until next time, keep watching Akahi News. Stories that